welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The Eric Erickson Show across the state of Georgia, around the nation, also broadcasting on Facebook Live. I hope you are doing well this morning. The phone number here, if you would like to be a part of the program, 877-973-7425. That is 877-97-ERIC, E-R-I-C-K, 877-973-7425, being the phone number you would want to use to call in, of course. Now, we need to talk about the elections last night. The elections last night were very interesting, and the media is rushing. The media is really rushing to blame Donald Trump for Matt Bevin's loss in Kentucky. Matt Bevin, the incumbent governor in Kentucky, going down to Andy Beshear last night. Listen, you can't blame Donald Trump for what happened in Kentucky. There are warning signs for the GOP around the nation last night, but Matt Bevin is not one of them. Matt Bevin is not one of the problems the GOP has to worry about. I want to play you some audio real quick. This is from Dana Bash at CNN. Well respected. I like Dana very much. She's been talking to Republicans overnight. Listen to this.
I just want to add to that, just like David is, I'm getting texts and emails from Republicans from Kentucky to here in Washington who were focused on and working on this campaign, saying that this is Bevin, he's a terrible candidate, he's disliked, he's the most unpopular governor in the country, so on and so forth. But I did get a very candid text as well to back up what David was just saying, somebody who works very hard in fundraising and strategy broadly in the Republican Party, saying that this, if Bevin does lose, it's a massive blow because the president went down there, the vice president, fundraisers, the Republican Governors Association, the Republican National Committee. And this person said, let's face it, a Republican president having to do rescue missions in Louisiana, Kentucky, and Mississippi means something is happening for the Republicans and Donald Trump, and it's not good.
Listen, it's not good for the president in that he went to Kentucky and campaigned for Matt Bevin, but you do have to remember that Matt Bevin was at 30% of the polls, and the president got him up to parity with Andy Beshear, who won by several thousand votes in a close election. But there's a lot of antipathy out there for the president from the media, and they're rushing to blame him for everything. This is not one of the races you can blame on Donald Trump. I want to explain to you why you can't blame this one on Donald Trump. You look at what happened in Kentucky overall last night. Take a holistic approach. If this was about an anti-Republican push because of Donald Trump, you would have seen other impacts in Kentucky that weren't felt. So Bevin lost. In fact, no Republican in Kentucky has ever won a second term for governor. You got to go back to, let's see, we had in 2004, it was Ernie Fletcher was the governor in Kentucky. He was there for a term. You got to go back to World War II for the previous Republican governor. The Republicans flipped the attorney general seat last night. You have a statewide elected black Republican in Kentucky as attorney general now. You got to go back to World War II to find the last Republican attorney general in Kentucky. In fact, the Republicans were able to flip one other statewide seat in Kentucky. They now control every statewide seat in Kentucky other than the governor's mansion. Does that sound like voters were reacting negatively to Republicans when they won every seat, flipped two, but they lost the governor's mansion? Republicans in Kentucky now have a super majority in the Kentucky state legislature. Does that sound like a Democratic issue? I mean, the Republicans in Kentucky will be able to redraw lines for redistricting now. Even if the governor vetoes those lines, the Republicans in Kentucky will be able to draw the lines with a supermajority. Does that sound like Democratic blowback against Donald Trump? No, the issue with Matt Bevin is that Matt Bevin was unpopular in Kentucky. I personally like Matt Bevin. I know Matt Bevin. I supported Matt Bevin when he ran against Mitch McConnell. Therein was another problem for Matt Bevin, though he's never been able to patch things up with Mitch McConnell after running against him in 2014. I was totally happy to support Matt Bevin then. I was glad to support him. But he didn't win, and those relationships were never repaired. They all came together in a kumbaya moment for the governor's race in, 2015. But Bevin was not anyone's favorite. The reason Matt Bevin got elected was because there was a nasty, nasty fight between the top two guys. Bevin was running in third, and the top two guys tore each other apart, destroyed each other. And voters were so disgusted with them in the Republican primary, they went with Bevin, who stayed out of the fighting, and he got the Republican nomination. But this year, Bevin was challenged in the primary, and he barely got by with 50% of the vote. I think he got by with 52% of the vote in a Republican primary, the incumbent Republican governor. That should tell you right there that Republicans had issues with Bevin, not with Trump. Trump won the state overwhelmingly. Trump is going to win the state in 2020. I mean, it's a no-brainer. No one even has Kentucky on the radar. So all of the emotional energy being spent in Kentucky on the claim that somehow Matt Bevin's loss was a problem for Donald Trump, that Matt Bevin's loss is on Donald Trump, it's not really true. And you can say it is, and you can say, well, we'll look at the suburbs. Yes, there are problems. But again, the GOP won every statewide office. They flipped two. They got a supermajority in the state legislature. If there was an anti-Republican animus motivating voters in Kentucky, you wouldn't have seen that. But you did. So this suggests it really was about Matt Bevin. There are problems for Republicans, though. And we don't need to dismiss those problems, even if we can say Bevin wasn't one of them. If you look at suburban voters, take Richmond, Virginia. Last night, Republicans lost control of the Virginia state legislature. They will play no part in redistricting. That means that the next 10 years will be a wandering in the wilderness for the Virginia GOP, if not longer than that. Virginia very much has become a blue state, and it's not just the Washington suburbs. Richmond, which had been a Republican stronghold, is now very Democratic. They lost the suburbs. They lost suburbs in the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia Beach, Norfolk area as well. Republicans did not do well in those suburban areas, and they didn't do so because there is a Republican backlash by suburban voters who don't like the president. This is a foreshadowing to come, by the way, of what's happening in the suburbs in Georgia. In Georgia, female voters are increasingly identifying as Democrat, not Republican, and there will be issues in the Georgia suburbs that Republicans are going to have to deal with. Republicans are going to have to put in a very good ground game in Georgia. In Mississippi, the race was not close. There was a lot of media speculation that it could be close in Mississippi. It was not close, but Tate Reeves, the governor, the incoming governor there, did have to call in Donald Trump to help him shore up some support. Suburban areas, even in Mississippi, are trending to the left. That's a warning sign. When you look at some of the counties in Pennsylvania that had local elections, Bucks County, you hear a lot about Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in the Philly area. It went overwhelmingly Democratic. There are some serious warning signs in suburban areas around the country, even down to municipal elections, that suggest the GOP has a bloodbath coming in 2020 in certain areas. You need to digest that. But, yeah, there is an absolute but we also need to explain. What we are also seeing is that how do I want to say this? What we're also seeing is that states that are Republican are tending to stay Republican, and states that are Democrat are tending to stay Democrat now. The country really is divided. Now, that sounds nonsensical. It sounds a lot like a nothing burger, but let me put it to you this way. What we are seeing, for example, take the turnout metrics for the New York Times Siena poll in North Carolina. North Carolina has been reliably seen as a swing state, and yet North Carolina very much has become a Republican state for Donald Trump. According to the New York Times Siena poll, Donald Trump wins North Carolina against any of the Democrats. When not that long ago, North Carolina was seen as a potential blue state. People talked about it as a trending blue state. Republicans had that special election where they secured the congressional seat that had tended to lean Republicans, but the suburbs in the Charlotte, North Carolina area trended Democrat, except not all of them did. Areas that were trending Democrat, and you've got to pay attention to this. If you only pay attention to one thing in the entire show today, please pay attention to this point. Suburban areas that were trending Democrat rushed to become Democrat in the special election in North Carolina for the congressional seat. The Republican wound up winning. Areas that had been trending Republican rushed to become Republican. What I mean by that is that there have been gradual trends in certain suburban areas making them more Democratic or more Republican. And Donald Trump, if anything, has served as a catalyst. A random experiment for you, totally random experiment for you. If you take hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Yes, we're into chemistry now. You'll only hear chemistry talked about on the radio right here. Might destroy the ratings. I apologize to the local stations and program managers for engaging in a chemistry discussion. Take H2O2. That is hydrogen peroxide. 2 atoms of hydrogen, 2 atoms of oxygen. You've got H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. You can use it to dye your hair. Hydrogen peroxide wants to get rid of the oxygen as rapidly as possible. If you expose it to light, expose it to heat, or there are various substances you can use. My favorite is called potassium permanganate. It is a purple crystalline substance, and you drop just one little bit of potassium permanganate in hydrogen peroxide, and the whole thing just goes explosive. I mean, it bubbles up. It's like the vinegar baking soda reaction. Except what's happening is you're not creating, like when you add vinegar and baking soda together, you're getting new compounds. With hydrogen peroxide and potassium permanganate, you're not getting a chemical reaction there per se where it's creating new chemicals. It's just releasing the oxygen. The oxygen wants to go away anyway. If you leave hydrogen peroxide in the sunlight, the oxygen is going to leach away, and you're going to get water out of it. But you add the potassium permanganate, and it escalates. It serves as a catalyst for the pre-existing reaction that was going to happen anyway. Well, we're seeing that Donald Trump, just like the potassium permanganate, you drop it in the hydrogen peroxide, and the whole thing just fizzes up, and all the oxygen goes away. If you stick a match to it, it explodes. It's actually pretty awesome. I don't recommend you try it at home. When I was a kid, I used to. I had this side venture as a kid where I would fill up balloons with hydrogen or oxygen, and my friends and I would blow them up, but that's neither here nor there. But it's a catalyst. It's a catalyst reaction. It escalates something that was already going to happen, a chemical reaction that was already going to happen. The catalyst speeds it up. Donald Trump is serving as a catalyst. Donald Trump you drop him into suburban areas and you immediately see that hydrogen peroxide fizzing up reaction, separating out between the oxygen and the water. You see it separating out the Democrats from the Republicans. You drop Donald Trump in the middle of a suburb, and suddenly, boom, the suburb either turns bright blue or the suburb turns bright red. And we saw that in North Carolina. And there were more Republican areas than there were Democratic areas, and that helped the Republicans. And we're seeing that translate differently around the country. For example, in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio is a state the Republicans must win. No Republican has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio. And we're seeing Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio suburbs that had been slightly Republican rapidly turning blue because of Donald Trump. We see this in the metro Atlanta area. I'm in Macon, south of Atlanta. I have a separate talk show in Atlanta. I deal with Atlanta a lot. I know Atlanta politics. And we're seeing this in Cobb County and Gwinnett County. With Gwinnett County, what's very interesting is it's not happening as rapidly as Cobb County. And part of the reason is demographics. Gwinnett County has a high Asian and Hispanic population, and Asian and Hispanic populations are not trending as Democratic as rapidly as black populations in Cobb County are making Cobb County, which is very interesting when you look at the demography, and this bears out. This bears out in the Siena New York Times Upshot polling that they did, that other demographics, that typically means Asian voters, they're not as rushing to become Democrat. And even Hispanic voters have a real shot at becoming Republican. This is a very interesting setup for the GOP, and it's playing out differently in different suburbs around the country. What's so nerve-wracking for Republicans, however, is look at Pennsylvania, where the president won Pennsylvania. But some of the areas that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 against Hillary Clinton are rapidly becoming more Democrat, including some of the Trump voters. The saving grace for Donald Trump in the poll trends in these swing districts, in these swing states, is this. A lot of voters are voting Democrat, except for Donald Trump. These are voters with no institutional partisan loyalty to Republicans. They're loyal to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, if anything, is operating in election years like Barack Obama. Barack Obama could never get Democrats to turn out to vote for his people in off-year elections, but they always turned out for him and voted for his party when he was on the ballot. And Donald Trump is doing that right now. There is a difference, though, that is something the Republicans are going to have to deal with, if we're honest about. And that is, while Republican areas, pre-existing Republican strongholds turned very bright red during the Obama years, the purplish areas, they didn't split apart and catalyze. They stayed kind of purplish. We've gotten to a point now with our politics in this country is so divided. What we're seeing is that in places like Bucks County, Pennsylvania, the Cincinnati suburbs, Dayton, Ohio suburbs, the Charlotte, North Carolina area, the Roswell, Sandy Springs, Lawrenceville and Gwinnett County areas in Georgia, the Dallas and Houston areas in Texas and the like, is that those purplish areas are now themselves splintering very definitively between red areas and blue areas. And more often than not, there are larger blue areas than red areas. That's a long-term trend against the Republicans, and they're going to have to figure out a way to combat that.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at 877-97-ERIC. That's 877-973-7425.